A billionaire with a broken heart, a maid with an unbreakable spirit, a reckless bet that changes everything. Ethan Carter, a ruthless businessman, never believed in love until Emma Brooks walked into his world. But when secrets unravel on their wedding night, he discovers a truth that shatters everything he thought he knew. The night stretched its velvet cloak over the city. Neon lights flickered like fallen stars, and the streets pulsed with life. Laughter, music, and the distant hum of car engines blended into a symphony of luxury and excess. This was a city where money was power, where status dictated worth. And in the heart of this glittering world stood a mansion, grand and imposing, its walls whispering stories of success and solitude. Within those walls lived a man who had everything money could buy, but nothing his heart could hold. This was the empire of Ethan Carter, a billionaire whose wealth could buy anything except the one thing he no longer believed in: love. Ethan Carter. A name that held weight in boardrooms, a name that dominated headlines, a man of power, control, an unshakable will. He was a self-made billionaire, a force in the business world. Every decision was calculated, every move precise. But beneath the polished suits and the confidence lay a truth no one saw. A man who had once believed in love and had been destroyed by it. Once there was a woman, Olivia Parker. She had been everything, his dream, his forever. But love, as he had learned the hard way, was nothing but a transaction. The day Olivia walked away, choosing a wealthier man over him, Ethan stopped believing. Since then, women had come and gone, but none of them mattered. Love, it was a game now, a temporary distraction, a battle of control. What he didn't know was that his rules were about to be broken, because somewhere, in a small corner of the city, a woman was about to step into his world and turn it upside down. Far from the city's glittering skyline, in a rundown apartment on the edge of town, Emma Brooks lived a life that was worlds apart from Ethan Carter's. A girl who had learned to survive, to fight, to never break. Her father, once a hard-working baker, had been in an accident that left him bedridden. Since then, Emma had carried the weight of their small, struggling world, but she was not weak. She refused to beg. She refused to be pitied. She worked tirelessly, taking odd jobs, doing whatever it took to keep food on the table. And like every girl, she had once dreamed of love. A love that was real. A love that wasn't about money, power, or status, but dreams. Don't put food on the table. Then, one day, a job offer came. A maid's position at Carter Mansion. Her heart clenched. It wasn't the life she had wanted, but she had no choice. Before stepping inside that grand estate, she whispered to herself, "No matter what, I will not lose my self-respect." Little did she know. This job wasn't just a job. It was the beginning of a storm. Carter Mansion was something out of a dream. Polished marble floors reflected the golden glow of chandeliers. Servants moved like ghosts, silent and efficient. The air carried the faint scent of expensive cologne and freshly brewed coffee. Emma had never seen wealth like this. And in the center of it all, Ethan Carter. He sat in the grand drawing room, dressed in a crisp charcoal suit. His presence was commanding, his expression unreadable. A whiskey glass rested in his hand, untouched, his gaze lost in thought. He didn't notice her at first. To him, she was just another employee. And then, she spoke. "Sir, if you can't speak to me with respect, perhaps you should find someone else to do your work." A heavy silence fell over the room. Ethan's fingers tightened around his glass, his cold, calculating eyes lifted, meeting hers. For a long moment he just stared. No one had ever spoken to him like that. Amusement flickered in his gaze. Or maybe irritation. Who the hell did she think she was? He didn't know it yet. But this moment was the beginning of something unstoppable. This wasn't just a first meeting. This was destiny taking its first step. The night was thick with the scent of power and arrogance. Inside a private lounge, the rich and the ruthless gathered. Their laughter was cold, their words sharp. Among them sat Ethan Carter, his usual whiskey in hand, his mind detached from the shallow conversations around him. He wasn't here for company. He was here because boredom was a dangerous thing. And boredom was what led to dangerous games. Ethan, tell me something. The voice belonged to Ryan Bennett, his oldest friend and business partner. One of the few people who dared to challenge him. Ethan tilted his glass, watching the amber liquid swirl before responding. What? Ryan smirked. You don't believe in love anymore, do you? Ethan let out a short, humorless laugh. Love? That's a fairy tale for fools. The men around them chuckled, nodding in agreement. But Ryan wasn't done. What if I told you that even the simplest woman can fall for you? That all women are the same? They want money, status, power. Ethan raised a brow, intrigued, but unimpressed. And what if I proved you wrong? Ryan leaned forward, his smirk deepening. I bet you. Give me 1 month, and I'll make you fall in love. Ethan scoffed, setting his glass down with a decisive thud. You can't make me do anything, Ryan. Ryan's eyes gleamed with mischief. Then let's flip it. You choose a woman. Any woman. Someone who would never be interested in a man like you. And make her fall for you instead. A slow, knowing smile curled at Ethan's lips. That was a challenge he couldn't ignore. Fine. His voice was dangerously smooth. He leaned back in his seat, glancing around the room as if searching for his target, and then his mind flashed back to earlier that evening, to the girl who had dared to talk back to him, the girl with fire in her eyes and steel in her spine. Emma Brooks. Ethan's smirk deepened. I already have someone in mind. Emma adjusted her apron, tying the knot tightly behind her waist. The mansion was vast, cold, nothing like a home. She had learned quickly, people like Ethan Carter lived in a world where emotions were a weakness. The staff spoke about him in whispers, ruthless, cold, untouchable. But Emma didn't care. She was here to do her job, earn her money, and leave. Love, affection. She had no time for such things. So when Ethan Carter suddenly began noticing her, she didn't think much of it. A few lingering stares. A casual question about her day. A rare smirk when she challenged his authority. But soon, it became more. One evening, as she cleaned the grand library, she felt his presence before she saw him. Emma. She turned, startled, to find him leaning against the doorway, watching her, his expression unreadable. Sir, she answered cautiously. You've been working here for a while. He stepped closer. Do you always avoid eye contact with your boss? Emma stiffened but forced herself to meet his gaze. His eyes were piercing, unreadable, like he was searching for something in her. I don't see why it matters, she replied, keeping her voice even. Ethan chuckled, the sound low and rich. It does, when you intrigue me. Emma's stomach tightened. She wasn't naive. She had heard stories about men like him, men who toyed with women's emotions like a game. And yet, something about him made her heart race, number she wouldn't be that girl. She stepped back, breaking the moment. If you'll excuse me, I have work to do. Ethan watched her go, amusement dancing in his eyes. She was going to be a challenge, and he thrived on challenges. What he didn't expect was that this challenge would cost him everything. Days turned into weeks. Ethan played the game perfectly. Little moments of unexpected kindness, lingering conversations, the way he would glance at her when he thought she wasn't looking. And Emma started noticing. The way his presence sent a shiver down her spine. The way his voice, deep and smooth, made her pulse quicken. The way he looked at her, like she was the only woman in the world. Number. She shook her head, trying to clear the thoughts. He was Ethan Carter, a man who didn't believe in love. But then, one night, it all changed. Emma had been working late, sorting books in the grand library when the lights flickered. A storm raged outside, thunder rumbling through the mansion walls, and then darkness. A gasp escaped her lips. She fumbled in the dim light, trying to find her way. "Emma!" She froze. Ethan's voice was close, too close, and then she felt it. His hand, warm, firm, gently touching her wrist. "Relax," he murmured, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "It's just the storm." Her breath caught. For a moment there was nothing but silence, the sound of rain against the windows, and the quiet, steady rhythm of her heart, beating too fast. She tried to pull away. "I should—" But his grip tightened. Not possessive, not demanding, just there. "You always run away, don't you?" he whispered. Emma swallowed hard, willing herself to ignore the way her body reacted to his closeness. "I don't run," she whispered back. "I just know when something isn't real." Ethan stilled. For the first time in a long time, someone had challenged him. And for the first time since this game began, he wondered if he was still in control. Or if he was the one falling. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one brewing inside Ethan Carter. He had played this game before, charming, teasing, drawing a woman in, just to prove to himself that love was nothing but a carefully crafted illusion. But this time, something was different. Emma Brooks wasn't like the women who chased him for his money. She didn't flirt with him. She didn't melt under his gaze. She didn't care who he was. And maybe that's why, night after night, he found himself watching her, the way her lips pressed together in determination when she worked. The way her laughter, rare but beautiful, filled the air when she thought no one was listening. The way she always stood tall even when the world tried to break her. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was just a bet, a game to prove a point. But now, he was the one losing. It started with an accident. Emma had been carrying a tray of wine glasses across the hall when one of the guests, a woman from Ethan's world, dripping in diamonds and arrogance, bumped into her on purpose. The tray slipped from her hands, the glasses crashing onto the floor, red wine splattering across the pristine marble. The entire room went silent. Emma's heart pounded as she bent down, quickly picking up the broken pieces. "Are you serious?" the woman scoffed, disgust clear in her voice. "I hope you're paying for that." A few guests laughed under their breath. Emma swallowed hard, heat creeping up her face, not from embarrassment but from rage. Before she could say a word, a voice cut through the tension. "Enough, Ethan." He stepped forward, his sharp, commanding presence silencing the room. His gaze, dark and furious, locked onto the woman. "You pushed her." The woman blinked, caught off guard. You pushed her, and now you expect her to apologize?" Ethan's tone was deadly calm. "Apologize to her." A shocked murmur rippled through the room. No one had ever seen Ethan Carter defend someone. The woman forced a nervous laugh. "Ethan, darling, it was just a little accident." "I don't care," he interrupted coldly. "Say, you're sorry." Emma felt her breath hitch. It wasn't the defense that shook her. It was the way he was looking at her, like he actually cared. The woman mumbled a forced apology before storming off, leaving Emma kneeling beside the broken glass, staring at Ethan in disbelief. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice softer now, just for her. Emma nodded, unable to speak, but something in that moment shifted. For the first time, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, Ethan Carter wasn't the man she thought he was. From that night on, everything changed. Ethan started finding excuses to be near her. Emma started noticing the way his eyes softened when he looked at her. One evening, as she stood by the balcony, lost in thought, she felt his presence before he spoke. "I don't understand you," Ethan murmured. Emma turned, surprised to see him standing so close. the golden city lights reflected in his eyes, making them seem almost vulnerable. "I don't understand you either," she admitted. He smirked, but there was something behind it, something real. "Then maybe we should try." Try what? She wanted to ask. Try understanding each other? Try stepping into dangerous territory? Try breaking down the walls they had both built? Her heartbeat betrayed her. This was dangerous. This was reckless. This was not real. And yet, when Ethan lifted his hand, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face, she didn't stop him. Neither of them realized they were already too far gone. The bet was never supposed to matter. But now Ethan hated himself for it. Every moment he had spent with Emma, their late-night conversations, the stolen glances, the way she made him feel like the man he used to be. It wasn't a game anymore. But the truth always finds a way to ruin happiness. And that night, Emma found out, it wasn't supposed to happen this way. She had been cleaning Ethan's office when she accidentally knocked over a folder from his desk. As she bent to pick up the papers, her eyes caught something that made her blood run cold. A printed email from Ryan Bennett. "How's the bet going?" "She must be falling for you by now. Don't forget. 1 month, and you win." Emma's hands shook as she read the words. Her vision blurred. She couldn't breathe. A bet. That's all she had ever been to him. That night, Ethan found her outside, standing beneath the stars, her arms crossed tightly, her face unreadable. "Emma," he called softly. She turned, and the second she met his gaze, he knew. She knew. "You played me." Her voice was steady, but her eyes were filled with pain. Ethan's chest tightened. "Emma, let me explain." "You don't have to." She laughed bitterly, shaking her head. "It was all just a game, wasn't it? A little challenge between you and your friends." "No." Ethan stepped closer, desperate now. "It started that way, but I swear to you, Emma, I never meant to fall for you." She flinched like his words had physically hurt her. "That's the worst part, Ethan." Her voice broke. "Because I did." Silence. A silence that felt like an ending. She turned to leave, and this time, Ethan didn't stop her. Because for the first time in his life, he realized he had won the bet, but he had lost her. The night was colder than usual, or maybe it was just Ethan Carter's world, now emptied of the only warmth it had ever known. He sat in his office, the glass of whiskey untouched on his desk, his fingers pressed against his temple. The silence in the mansion felt deafening. Emma was gone, and for the first time in his life, he had no idea how to fix something. Ryan Bennett sat across from him, watching with a mixture of amusement and concern. "You won, man." Ethan's jaw clenched. He couldn't even look at Ryan. "Emma fell for you," Ryan continued. "That was the bet, wasn't it? To prove that no woman is different. To prove they all fall in the end." Ethan's knuckles turned white against the desk. This isn't a victory. This was the worst loss of his life. Ryan sighed, standing up. "If it makes you feel better, she was just a maid, Ethan. She was never meant to be part of your world anyway." A loud crash filled the room as Ethan's fist slammed into the whiskey glass, shattering it into 1,000 shards. Ryan flinched. "Jesus, man. Get out." Ethan's voice was dangerously low. Ryan hesitated. "Ethan?" "I said get out." Ryan sighed and left, shaking his head. Ethan sat there staring at his trembling hands, his chest rising and falling with rage. Number Emma wasn't just a maid. She wasn't just some passing fling. She was everything. And he had destroyed her. Emma Brooks had never known what real heartbreak felt like until now. She sat on the edge of her small bed in her tiny apartment, her fingers gripping the letter of resignation she had sent earlier that morning. She was free of Ethan Carter's world. But was she free of him? Her heart ached at the thought of his voice, his touch, the way he had made her believe, even for a moment, that she was special. How could she have been so stupid? It was all a lie. She had given him her trust, her heart. And all along, she had been nothing more than a bet. A cruel joke. Tears burned in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. No more. She was done being the fool. Days passed, then weeks, and with each passing moment, Ethan felt the weight of her absence crushing him. He tried to drown himself in work, tried to go back to the man he was before Emma Brooks walked into his life, tried to forget the way she had looked at him before she left, like he had completely shattered her. But he couldn't. Nothing felt right anymore. His mansion, once a symbol of power, now felt like a prison. The women who threw themselves at him. Empty distractions. The business deals he once lived for. Pointless. Everything felt wrong, because Emma was gone, and he wanted her back. One evening, Ethan found himself parked outside a small bookstore, the same one where Emma had once mentioned she loved spending time. He wasn't sure why he was there. Maybe because it was the closest thing he had to her. He stepped inside, the soft chime of the bell ringing above him. The warm scent of old books and vanilla filled the air, reminding him of the way her hair had smelled when she stood close to him. An elderly woman at the counter smiled at him. "Can I help you find something, sir?" Ethan hesitated. "Yes," he wanted to say. "I'm looking for something I lost. A girl with the kindest heart and the fiercest soul I've ever known. The only person who made me feel alive." But instead, he only managed to shake his head. Number just looking. He wasn't just looking. He was breaking. And for the first time, he realized. He loved her. Not as part of some game. Not because of a bet. Not because he had wanted to win, but because Emma Brooks was the only thing in his world that had ever felt real. And he had to get her back. Ethan Carter was not a man who apologized, not a man who admitted mistakes, not a man who begged. But for her, he would do it all. Because without Emma, he was nothing. He found out where she worked, a small community school where she had started teaching kids, far away from his world. And one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and violet, he stood outside, waiting. The moment she stepped out, her breath hitched. Because there he was, Ethan Carter, the man she had tried so hard to forget, standing outside her new world, waiting. For her. Her heart pounded as she met his gaze. His eyes, once cold and unreadable, were now raw, desperate, apologetic. Emma. His voice was hoarse, as if he had spent nights losing sleep over her. "Please." She crossed her arms. "Why are you here?" He took a step closer, then another, and another, until they were close enough that she could feel his warmth the way she once had. "Because," he whispered, "I love you." Emma froze. Ethan had never said those words before. Not once. She had once imagined hearing them from him. But now they felt like a cruel trick. "You're lying," she whispered, stepping back. "Just like you did before." Ethan shook his head. "I'm not lying, Emma. I swear to you. I didn't know what love was until I lost you." Emma clenched her jaw, fighting back the tears. "You expect me to believe that after everything?" "I don't expect you to believe anything," he said softly. "I just need you to know that I will spend every single day proving it to you." Emma's breath shuddered. This was not the Ethan Carter she had known. This was a man who had broken because of her. A man who was finally ready to love. And maybe, just maybe. She wasn't ready to forgive him yet, but she wasn't ready to let him go either. Emma Brooks never believed in second chances, because second chances meant reopening wounds. Second chances meant trusting someone who had already broken you once. Second chances were for fools. And yet, here she was, standing in the golden glow of the streetlights, staring at Ethan Carter, the man who had shattered her heart, begging her for one. "I will spend every single day proving it to you," he had said. His voice had been raw, desperate, real. But was it enough? Could love erase betrayal? Could she really trust the man who had once seen her as nothing but a bet? Her heart screamed yes. Her mind whispered no. And so without a word, she turned and walked away. Not because she didn't feel anything, but because she felt too much. Ethan stood there watching the only woman he had ever loved walk away. Again. But this time, he wasn't going to let her slip through his fingers. The old Ethan Carter would have called this a loss, would have walked away, burying himself in meaningless distractions. But this Ethan Carter, he was going to fight. Because if there was one thing he knew about Emma Brooks, it was this. She didn't trust words. She only believed actions. And so, Ethan became a man of action. The first thing he did was burn the past. He cut off ties with Ryan Bennett. Every single person who had been part of that cruel bet, gone. He ended the games, the distractions, the cold-hearted business persona he had built around himself. Because none of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was her. And so, for the first time in his life, Ethan Carter did something he had never done before. He waited. For her. He showed up at the school every evening just to see her. Not to talk, not to push, just to be there. To show her that he wasn't going anywhere. Emma pretended not to notice, but she did. She noticed the way he had stopped showing up in the news with supermodels on his arm. She noticed the way he had changed, the way he spoke softer now, the way he didn't try to control everything around him anymore. She noticed the way he looked at her, not with arrogance, but with longing. And maybe, just maybe, she started to believe him. Just when Emma thought she was ready to let him back in. The past came knocking, and this time, it wasn't a cruel bet. It was something worse. Olivia Parker, the woman who had once broken Ethan Carter before Emma ever did. She arrived at Emma's school one evening, stepping out of a sleek black car, her heels clicking against the pavement, her lips curled in a smirk. Ah, she sighed, eyeing Emma with amusement. So you're the one who made Ethan Carter go soft. Emma's stomach twisted. She had seen Olivia's face before, in old tabloids, in stories whispered about the woman who had walked away from Ethan years ago. What do you want? Emma asked, forcing herself to stay calm. Olivia tilted her head, eyes gleaming with something dangerous. To warn you. Emma crossed her arms. I don't need warnings. Oh, but you do. Olivia took a step closer. Ethan doesn't love sweetheart. He obsesses. He fixates. And when he's done, he moves on. Emma clenched her fists. You think he's changed for you? Olivia chuckled darkly. Do you have any idea how many times he told me he loved me? Emma swallowed hard. He'll tire of you, Olivia whispered, leaning in. And when he does, you'll regret ever letting him in. Emma wanted to believe Ethan was different, that he wasn't the same man Olivia had once loved, but the scars on her heart whispered something else. What if Olivia was right? What if Ethan was only fighting for her because he hadn't won yet? What if, the moment she let him back in, he walked away? Again. Emma didn't show up the next day, or the next, or the next. Ethan knew something was wrong. And when he finally found her, standing alone outside her apartment, her arms wrapped around herself as if trying to hold herself together, he knew. Someone had gotten to her. Emma, he said carefully, stepping closer. Talk to me. She looked up, and the look in her eyes, fear, doubt, hesitation, made his heart crack open. Did you say the same things to her? She whispered. Ethan stilled. Emma took a shaky breath. Did you tell Olivia Parker you loved her? Realization dawned in Ethan's eyes, and then pain. Emma, he murmured, voice rough. Olivia and I. He stopped, running a hand through his hair. I thought I loved her, but I didn't know what love was back then. Emma let out a soft, bitter laugh. And now you do? Ethan's throat tightened. Because of you. Silence. A silence filled with 1,000 unspoken emotions. Then, quietly, he said the words that changed everything. I would rather spend my life proving my love to you than spend one more day without you. Emma's heart pounded. Ethan took a slow step closer. I know I hurt you, and I know I can never take that pain away, but Emma, I am not leaving. His voice broke. I am never leaving. And that was when Emma realized. It was real. He was real. She had spent so long trying to convince herself that Ethan Carter was a mistake. But the real mistake would be walking away from the one man who was willing to fight for her no matter what. Ethan Carter had spent his life believing love was nothing but an illusion. Until Emma Brooks. She was the one thing in his life that wasn't calculated, wasn't a business deal, wasn't part of the power-hungry world he had built. She was real. And now he was at risk of losing her again. This time. Forever. Because love, no matter how deep, isn't always enough. And soon Ethan would learn that some demons don't stay buried. Emma tried to breathe, to think, to believe that Ethan wasn't like Olivia had said. But when you've been broken before, when trust has been shattered once, it's hard to stop the fear from whispering inside your mind. What if he gets bored? What if he walks away like before? What if I'm just another challenge to him? She had spent too long fighting for her self-worth to be someone's temporary fix. And so she did the only thing she knew how to do. She pulled away. She stopped answering his calls, stopped going to the school where he had waited for her every evening, stopped letting herself believe that he truly loved her. Because what if she let herself fall again, and this time she never recovered? Ethan was losing his mind. Emma was slipping through his fingers, and he didn't know how to stop it. He had given up power for her, had burned every bridge to his past, had fought for her. But none of it mattered if she didn't believe in him. And Ethan Carter wasn't a man who begged. Not for business, not for power, not for love. But for her, for Emma, he would do it 1,000 times. One evening, when the city lights flickered in the distance and the world seemed to hold its breath, Ethan went to her. He found her standing outside her apartment, her arms wrapped around herself, as if she could protect herself from him. Emma, he called, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. She didn't turn. Emma, please look at me. Her throat tightened, but she stayed still. She couldn't let him in. Not again. Ethan wouldn't let her run. Not this time. Tell me to leave, he said, stepping closer. If you really don't want me here, tell me, and I swear I'll walk away. Emma clenched her fists. She couldn't say it, because it would be a lie. Instead, she whispered, I don't know how to trust you. Ethan's breath hitched. Not because he was angry, but because he understood. He reached out, slowly, gently, and took her hand, his touch warm and steady. Then let me prove it to you, he said, voice breaking, not with words, with time, with actions, with everything I have. Emma looked up, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. She wanted to believe him. But could she survive another heartbreak? I'm scared, she admitted. Ethan cupped her face, his thumb brushing away a single tear that escaped. So am I, he whispered. But I'd rather be scared with you than be alone without you. A sob broke from her lips, and for the first time in weeks, she let herself fall. Ethan Carter had once thought love was a game. Now he knew better. Because real love doesn't end. It doesn't break under the weight of fear. It doesn't disappear when things get hard. It fights. And when Ethan held Emma that night, his arms wrapped around her as she cried into his chest, he knew. He would spend forever proving that she was never just a bet. She was his everything. Emma Brooks had done the one thing she swore she would never do again. She let Ethan Carter back in. She had believed him when he said he had changed. She had felt it in the way his hands trembled when they touched her, in the way his voice cracked when he whispered her name, in the way he looked at her like she was the only thing that mattered. And for a while she let herself believe in the fairy tale. But love is never that simple. Because no matter how deep their feelings ran, no matter how much Ethan fought for her, the past was still there, waiting, watching, ready to destroy them both. It started as a whisper, a rumor that spread through the city like wildfire. Ethan Carter is playing her. She's just another distraction. He hasn't changed at all. Emma tried to ignore it. She told herself it was just jealousy, gossip, the world trying to pull them apart. But then she saw the headline. Ethan Carter seen leaving Olivia Parker's apartment late at night. Her stomach plummeted. The photo wasn't grainy, it wasn't blurred, it was clear. Ethan walking out of Olivia's building, his expression cold, unreadable. Emma couldn't breathe. That night, when Ethan arrived at her apartment, she was already waiting. Her heart was pounding, her hands were shaking, but she refused to let the tears fall. Not this time. Ethan stepped inside, his eyes immediately searching her face. "Emma, what's wrong?" She threw the magazine on the table between them. His gaze flickered to the photo. A long silence filled the room. Then, "It's not what you think." Emma let out a sharp laugh, the sound hollow. Don't insult me with that." "Emma," he took a step forward, "I swear to you I did not go there for her." She shook her head. "Then tell me the truth. Why were you there?" Ethan hesitated, and that was all she needed, that hesitation. It was worse than a lie. Her breath shuddered. "You promised me," she whispered. "You said you were done with the past." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I am, Olivia. She's trying to ruin us, Emma. She wanted me to come there so the media would see. She wants you to doubt me." Emma looked into his eyes, searching for the truth, but all she saw was pain. Pain. And fear. Not fear of losing her. Fear of whatever secret he was still keeping. Her throat tightened. "There's something you're not telling me." Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Emma, please." "No." She took a step back. "No more secrets. No more lies. If you want me to stay, you tell me everything. Right now." Silence. A silence that felt like an ending. And then Ethan spoke, his voice hoarse, broken. "There's something I never told you," he admitted. "Something that could destroy us both." Emma's heart stopped, because in that moment she knew the worst was yet to come. Ethan's hands trembled. He had spent his entire life keeping secrets. But this one could cost him the only woman he had ever loved. He took a slow breath, forcing himself to meet her gaze. "Olivia wasn't just my ex," he said quietly. "She was my business partner." Emma frowned. "What?" Ethan clenched his jaw. "Years ago, when we were together, she helped me close a deal that, if exposed, could ruin everything." Emma's stomach twisted. "What kind of deal?" Ethan hesitated. Then, in a voice so low it was almost a whisper, he said, "A deal that put innocent people in danger." Emma's heart stopped. The room felt too small. The air felt too thick. "You knew," she whispered, stepping back. "You knew this whole time, and you never told me?" "Emma, People got hurt, Ethan," she choked out. "And you just walked away." "I didn't have a choice." His voice was desperate. "I was young. I was reckless. Olivia had power over me, and He exhaled sharply. "I made the wrong decision." Emma felt like the ground beneath her was crumbling. The Ethan Carter she thought she knew wasn't the man standing in front of her. Tears burned in her eyes. "Why are you telling me this now?" Ethan's throat worked as he swallowed. "Because Olivia threatened to expose it. She said if I didn't leave you, she would ruin everything." Emma's breath caught. "So, what? You were going to walk away?" Ethan's eyes darkened. "No," he said fiercely. "I told her I would rather lose everything than lose you." Silence. A silence that stretched between them like a knife. Ethan took a slow step forward. "I know I've made mistakes. I know I don't deserve you. But Emma, you are the only thing in my life that has ever felt real." Emma's chest ached. She wanted to believe him. But trust was fragile, and she wasn't sure if they had any left. "I need time," she whispered. Ethan's expression shattered, but he nodded. "Take all the time you need." His voice was rough, broken, but he meant it, because for the first time in his life, Ethan Carter was willing to wait. For her, for them. Emma Brooks had always believed that love was supposed to be simple, but nothing about Ethan Carter was simple. He had given her every reason to run, every reason to doubt him, every reason to believe he was just another powerful man who played with emotions like pieces on a chessboard. And yet, when she closed her eyes, she still saw him. The way his voice had cracked when he said, "I would rather lose everything than lose you." The way his hands had trembled when he reached for her. The way he had stood there, waiting, not as a man used to winning, but as a man terrified of losing. She wanted to believe in him, but belief meant risking her heart again. And Emma wasn't sure if she could survive breaking a second time. Olivia Parker was not the kind of woman who accepted defeat. She had built Ethan Carter once, made him who he was, and she refused to watch him throw everything away for a woman like Emma Brooks. Emma wasn't special, she wasn't powerful, she wasn't one of them. And Olivia was going to make sure she never would be. So she made the call. One that would set fire to everything Ethan had tried to rebuild. One that would force him to make an impossible choice. One that would ensure that if she couldn't have him, no one would. The first explosion came in the form of a news report. The second came in the form of an arrest. By the time the headlines hit the city, it was too late. Ethan Carter under investigation for fraud and corruption, illegal business deal linked to Olivia Parker, and Carter Industries, the man who had it all. Now has nothing. The board members turned on him. His investors pulled out. His accounts were frozen. And when the authorities arrived at his office, slapping the warrant on his desk, he knew. Olivia had done exactly what she had threatened to do. She had burned him to the ground. And this time, he had no way out. Emma sat frozen as she stared at the television screen. The words felt unreal. Ethan Carter, accused of corruption. The man who had fought so hard to prove to her that he was different. The man who had sworn he was done with his past. Was it all a lie? Had she been foolish to ever believe he had changed? Her chest ached. But more than the pain, more than the betrayal, there was fear. Because despite everything, despite the hurt, despite the doubts, she still loved him. And now the entire world was watching as the man she loved was being torn apart. When Emma arrived at the mansion, it was already in ruins. The media had camped outside. Lawyers moved in and out like vultures. And Ethan was nowhere to be found. Her heart pounded as she ran past the chaos, ignoring the shouts, the flashing cameras, the questions being hurled at her like knives. She didn't care about the world. She only cared about him. Finally, she found him. Standing in his empty office, his back to her, staring out at the skyline like it was already lost to him. She sucked in a shaky breath. Ethan. He didn't turn, didn't move, didn't breathe. But when he finally spoke, his voice was not the voice she knew. "You should leave, Emma." Her stomach twisted. "No," he let out a hollow chuckle. "You're standing in a sinking ship, and I'm the captain who let it sink." She stepped closer. "Tell me what happened." He turned then, and her heart shattered. Because the Ethan Carter standing before her wasn't the man she had fought with, loved, or broken apart with. This was a man who had already lost everything. And now he was waiting for her to leave too. Emma clenched her fists. "No," she whispered. "I'm not leaving you." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I have nothing left to offer you, Emma." She lifted her chin. "I never wanted your money." His eyes darkened. "You don't understand." She grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. I understand this, she said fiercely. I understand that I loved you when you were on top of the world, and I still love you now that you've lost it all. Ethan's breath shuddered, but she wasn't done. I don't care about your money. I don't care about the world turning against you. I care about you. And if you think I'm going to walk away just because things got hard, then you never really understood me at all. His hands trembled as they lifted, hesitant, unsure, to her waist. Emma. She leaned in, her forehead resting against his. I love you, Ethan. And I don't care if we have to start over from nothing. I'm not leaving. And that was when Ethan Carter finally broke. Broke open. Broke free. Broke for her. His arms wrapped around her like she was the only thing keeping him standing. And maybe, just maybe, she was. Ethan Carter had been powerful once, untouchable, feared, respected. Now? Now he was a man stripped of everything except the woman standing before him, Emma Brooks. She had seen him at his best. She had seen him at his worst. And she was still here. But love wasn't enough to fix the damage that had been done. Because when the world has already decided you're guilty, how do you prove them wrong? Emma refused to let Ethan give up. She stood beside him when the world turned its back. She held his hand when he signed away his empire. She was his strength when he had none left. But Olivia Parker? She wasn't finished yet. She had destroyed his career. She had taken his fortune. But she hadn't taken Emma. And that was her biggest mistake. Because Emma Brooks was not a woman who could be intimidated. And if Olivia thought she could take Ethan down completely, she was about to learn what it meant to go to war with a woman in love. The breaking point came in the form of a letter, delivered in a sleek black envelope slipped under Emma's apartment door. A single piece of paper with a message that turned her blood cold. If you walk away from him now, you will be saving him from something far worse. No name, no threats, just a warning. And suddenly Emma wasn't sure what scared her more, the idea that Olivia was still pulling the strings, or the fact that someone else was waiting in the shadows. Ethan was used to people betraying him. But when Emma showed him the letter, something changed. For the first time, he wasn't just angry. He was afraid. Because this wasn't just Olivia's game anymore. This was bigger. Someone wanted him gone. And the worst part? Emma was now part of the war. Ethan had spent years playing by the rules. Now? Now he was going to burn those rules to the ground. He met Olivia face to face. For the first time since she destroyed him, he stood before her, his presence sharp as a blade. Call them off, he said, his voice deadly calm. Olivia smirked, swirling her wineglass. Call who off, darling? You know exactly what I'm talking about. She tilted her head, pretending to think. Oh, you mean the people who would rather see you buried than redeemed? She leaned in. You made a lot of enemies, Ethan. You really thought I was the worst of them, his jaw clenched. You're playing with something you don't understand, Olivia. Her smirk widened. No, darling, you are. That night, Ethan made a decision. He had lost his empire. He had lost his reputation. But he refused to lose Emma. And if protecting her meant walking away, then he would, even if it killed him. Emma knew something was wrong the moment Ethan showed up at her door. His face was unreadable, his eyes dark, haunted. She stepped forward, heart pounding. Ethan, what's... I have to leave. Her entire world tilted. What? Ethan swallowed hard, forcing the words out. It's the only way to keep you safe. No. Her voice cracked. You're not doing this. We fight together. He took her face in his hands, his touch trembling. Emma, if anything happened to you because of me, his voice broke. I couldn't live with it. Tears burned in her eyes. She grabbed his wrists. And you think I could live without you? Silence. A silence filled with 1,000 unsaid words. Then, finally, a whisper. I love you, Emma. Her breath shuddered. Then stay. Ethan closed his eyes, pressing his forehead to hers. I can't. And then he walked away, leaving behind the only woman he had ever truly loved. Emma Brooks had never been the kind of woman who waited for life to decide her fate. She had survived too much, fought too hard, lost too many pieces of herself to just stand still and watch love slip away. So when Ethan Carter walked out of her life, thinking he was protecting her, thinking she would just move on, he underestimated who he had fallen in love with, because Emma wasn't done fighting. Not for herself, not for him, and certainly not for the love that had survived betrayal, heartbreak, and destruction. Ethan Carter thought he had saved her, but what he didn't realize, Emma was going to be the one to save him. Ethan had disappeared without a trace, no calls, no messages, not a single sign of where he had gone. But Emma knew one thing for sure. Ethan Carter wasn't a man who ran unless he had nowhere left to turn. And that meant someone had forced his hand. She started with the last place she knew he had been, the mansion he had built his empire in. Except it was no longer his. The gates were locked, the windows were dark, his world had collapsed and he had let it. Emma clenched her fists. Number. She wouldn't let him fade into nothing, because Ethan Carter still had a future, and she would drag him back to it, even if he refused to fight for himself. Emma wasn't the only one searching for Ethan, because someone else wanted him found, and they wanted him dead. It started as a whisper, a conversation overheard in the corner of a cafe. She's still looking for him. She won't stop. If she gets too close, she'll end up just like him. Emma's stomach twisted. This wasn't just about Ethan losing his fortune. This wasn't about Olivia's revenge. This was bigger. And suddenly, she realized Ethan didn't leave to protect himself. He left to protect her. The pieces started coming together. A hidden offshore account drained overnight. A security deposit box in a city 3 hours away. A private investigator's report that had been left unfinished. And then finally, a name, a cabin, a location. Emma didn't hesitate. She packed a bag, got into her car, and drove straight into the unknown. Because if Ethan thought he could run from her, from them, he had no idea who he was dealing with. The cabin was deep in the mountains, hidden by trees and swallowed by silence. There was no car in the driveway, no lights in the windows. For a terrifying second, Emma wondered if she was too late, if she had lost him after all. Then a shadow moved inside. Her heart pounded. She stepped forward, her hands shaking as she pounded on the door. Nothing. Another knock. Harder this time. Still nothing. And then the door opened. And standing there, his eyes dark with exhaustion, his body bruised, his soul shattered, was the man she had crossed the world to find. Ethan Carter. And for the first time in his life, he looked at her, like he had no idea how to breathe. Emma didn't wait. She didn't hesitate. She threw herself into his arms. Ethan's entire body went rigid beneath her touch, like he couldn't believe she was real, like he had already decided she was gone. His voice was hoarse when he finally spoke. Emma, what are you doing here? She pulled back just enough to meet his gaze, and what she saw broke her. His face was hollowed with sleepless nights. His knuckles were bruised. His eyes, those same stormy grey eyes that had once been so full of arrogance, now held nothing but loss. I came for you, she whispered. Ethan exhaled, closing his eyes. You shouldn't have. A tear slipped down her cheek, and you shouldn't have left. He opened his mouth, to argue, to push her away, but Emma was done with his excuses. I know everything, Ethan. Her voice was steady now, unwavering. I know you didn't just leave because of Olivia. I know someone else is after you. I know you thought you were protecting me. Ethan stilled. And I know you're not fighting back, she whispered, voice breaking, because you don't think you have anything left to fight for. A sharp inhale. A muscle twitched in his jaw. I don't, he admitted. Not anymore. Emma's hands trembled as she reached up, cupping his face, forcing him to look at her. "Then let me remind you," she whispered. Ethan's breath hitched, and then she kissed him, desperately, fiercely, like she was trying to breathe life back into him, like she was reminding him what love felt like she was reminding him that he wasn't alone. And just like that, the walls Ethan had built around himself crumbled, his hands fisted into her jacket, his lips moving against hers with years of unsaid words, pain, love, regret, longing, everything he had ever held back, everything he had ever lost. It all poured into that kiss, because Ethan Carter had tried to leave Emma Brooks behind. But love doesn't end with goodbye. And when he pulled her closer, when he let himself fall into her completely, he finally realized the truth. Emma wasn't his weakness. She was the only thing keeping him alive. Ethan Carter had spent his life building walls. Walls to keep the world out. Walls to protect himself from getting hurt. Walls to convince himself that love was nothing but a weakness. But now, Emma Brooks had torn them all down. She had found him when he had given up. She had held him when he believed there was nothing left to fight for. She had saved him. And now Ethan Carter knew one thing for sure. If anyone tried to take her away from him, he would burn the whole world down. Ethan and Emma barely had a moment to breathe before the storm hit. It came in the dead of night. A single phone call. A voice that was too familiar, too cruel. Olivia. "Well, well," she drawled. "You really should have stayed gone, darling." Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. "What do you want?" A cold chuckle. "Oh, Ethan, it's not about what I want anymore. It's about what's going to happen next." His stomach turned to ice. "You see," Olivia continued, "I may have taken your fortune, your name, your power. But there's still one thing left to destroy, isn't there?" Ethan's entire body went rigid. His pulse pounded. "Don't." His voice was dangerous now, sharp as a blade, but Olivia just laughed. "I wonder," she mused, "how much it would take to make Emma Brooks disappear for good." The call cut off. And Ethan Carter saw red. He turned to Emma so fast she barely had time to react before he grabbed her by the shoulders. "We have to leave," he said, his voice frantic. "Right now." Emma's eyes widened. "Ethan, what?" "It's not safe," he interrupted. His grip tightened. "She's coming for you, Emma, and I swear to God I will not let her touch you." But Emma didn't flinch. She didn't panic. She just reached up, placing a hand on his chest, right over his racing heartbeat. "I'm not running," she said softly. Ethan froze. Emma lifted her chin. "I've spent my whole life running from things that scared me, but not this, not you." His throat worked. "Emma, we fight," she whispered. "Together." And for the first time in his life, Ethan Carter understood what love truly meant, because she wasn't afraid. She was ready to stand by him, even if it meant walking straight into the fire. It all led to this: a deserted building, a storm raging outside, and the woman who had been pulling the strings from the beginning, Olivia Parker. She stood near the large glass window, looking as composed as ever. Her eyes gleamed with something wicked as she took a sip from her wineglass. "Well," she sighed, tilting her head, "you just don't know when to quit, do you, Ethan?" Ethan stepped forward, shielding Emma behind him. His voice was ice. "If you so much as breathe in her direction, I swear." Olivia held up a hand, mocking. "Spare me the threats, darling. We both know you have nothing left." But she was wrong, because Ethan did have something left. He had Emma, and she was the one thing he would never let Olivia take. Before Ethan could say another word, Emma stepped forward. She moved past him, right up to Olivia, and smiled. "I have a question," Emma said, voice calm, calculated. Olivia raised a brow, amused. "Oh? Do share." Emma tilted her head. "If you're so powerful, why are you so obsessed with a man who doesn't love you?" The room went silent. Olivia's smirk faltered. Emma took another step closer. That's what this is really about, isn't it? It was never about the business, never about revenge. You just couldn't stand that he stopped choosing you. A flash of rage crossed Olivia's face. But Emma, she wasn't done. You lost him a long time ago, Emma whispered. And no matter how hard you try to destroy him, you'll never get him back. Silence. A long, dangerous silence. Then, a sharp crack. Olivia's hand collided with Emma's face. Ethan lunged, but Emma didn't flinch. She just turned her head back, met Olivia's wild, furious gaze, and smiled. Because Emma had already won. Olivia had power. She had wealth. But Emma, she had Ethan's heart. And no amount of destruction could ever change that. You don't get to win, Olivia hissed, her voice shaking with rage. Emma's voice was quiet, steady. I already have. Olivia's hands clenched, her entire body shook with the weight of losing. Then she turned, walked away. And just like that, the war was over. The drive home was silent, not tense, not painful, just quiet. Ethan's fingers were tight around the steering wheel. Emma reached over, lacing her fingers through his. He let out a slow, shaky breath. I don't deserve you, he whispered. Emma smiled softly. That's not your decision to make. A small chuckle, rough, exhausted, but real. He pulled the car over, turned toward her, and in the soft glow of the city lights, he memorized her. The woman who had fought for him when he had nothing left. The woman who had looked at him when he was broken and said, I'm staying. The woman who had saved him. And then he kissed her. Not with desperation. Not with fear. But with everything he had left. With love. With forever. Because Ethan Carter had spent his life chasing power, money, control. But now, he had Emma Brooks. And for the first time in his life, that was enough. Ethan Carter had spent his life believing love was a weakness, that it was something he could never have, something he would never deserve. Until Emma Brooks. She had walked into his world like a storm, tearing apart everything he thought he knew. She had fought for him when he had nothing left. She had saved him. And now, for the first time in his life, he was ready to fight for her too. Ethan stood at the edge of the lake, the quiet hum of the world settling around him. He hadn't been to this place in years. This cabin, this lake, it had once been his escape, a place where he hid from the world. But now? Now it was the place where he was about to start over. With her. His fingers tightened around the small velvet box in his pocket. For the first time in his life, Ethan Carter was nervous. Not about business, not about power, but about a single question, one that could change everything. Emma stepped outside, her bare feet pressing against the cool wooden deck. The air smelled like pine, like rain, like peace. She spotted Ethan near the water, his back to her, his hands in his pockets. Her heart softened. Even now, even after everything, he still carried his burdens like armor. She walked toward him, the soft crunch of gravel under her feet making him turn. The moment he saw her, his expression shifted. Something softened in his eyes, something unchanged and yet entirely new. Hey, she said gently. His lips twitched. Hey. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Then Ethan took a slow breath, reaching into his pocket, pulling out the box. Emma's breath caught. He swallowed hard, stepping closer, his voice low, rough. I never thought I'd be the kind of man to do this. He exhaled sharply. And maybe I still don't deserve to be. Emma froze. His fingers traced the edges of the box, almost as if he was steadying himself. But then you walked into my life, he whispered, and you made me believe in things I never thought were real. A lump formed in her throat. You saved me, Emma. His voice broke. Not just from the world, from myself. Tears burned in her eyes. And I know I can't promise you perfection. He exhaled shakily. I can't promise that I'll never screw up. But I can promise you this. He opened the box. A ring. Simple, elegant, timeless, like her. I will spend the rest of my life proving to you that you were never just a bet, he whispered, that you were always my only choice. Emma's breath hitched. Ethan's voice was barely above a whisper now. Marry me. A sob escaped her lips. She stared at him, the man who had once been cold, ruthless, untouchable. Now standing before her, completely open, completely vulnerable, completely hers. She didn't hesitate. She threw herself into his arms. Yes, she breathed against his lips, 1,000 times. Yes. And when he kissed her, when he held her against him like she was the most precious thing in the world, Ethan Carter finally knew what it meant to have everything, because for the first time in his life, he was home. The city had changed, or maybe they had. Ethan Carter was no longer the man the world feared. He had rebuilt his life, but this time with her. Emma Brooks was no longer a woman running from the past, because she had found her future. And as she stood on the balcony of their apartment, Ethan's arms wrapped around her from behind, she knew. They had won. Not the game, not the power struggle, but each other. And in the end, that was the only victory that had ever mattered.